So before we begin, once we have our paper set up, we're going to need to tape it down. You can use painter's tape, which helps prevent the watercolor paper from ripping. You can also use masking tape. Just make sure that you kind of de-stick it on your clothes so that it doesn't rip your paper later. So I'm going to go ahead and tape my paper down, taping all 4 sides. The first 3 techniques I'm going to show you are your most basic. There are 3 different types of washes. It's basically 3 washes are next to each other. Let them dry in between your painting so that they don't bleed together. So I have some color over here that's been mixed, and I'm going to start by painting from left to right or from right to left all the way across the paper. And it'll lift up when I get to the edge, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to stroke all the way across, pulling some of that color, and get a little bit more on my brush. Basically, you want your strokes to be nice and even, and you can go the other direction too if you're starting to get that little kind of buildup of paint. But then as you go down to create a graded wash, I'm actually going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to come back in with, this is just a little bit of color now. I'm going to get rid of a little bit more color, and I'm going to keep going back and forth, adding more water and removing more color each time. So I have a nice, beautiful gradient going from blue to white. Okay, the next type of wash I'm going to do is called a flat wash. Basically, it's the same process of back and forth strokes with a flat brush, but this time, instead of letting some of the color leave my brush as I get to the end, I'm actually going to continue to add the same amount of color all the way down because I want it to look flat. I don't want the color to change. Alright, for our final wash, we're going to be doing a variegated wash. Really all this means is that we're going from one color to another. So we're going to start with a blue mixture. And it's the same exact technique we've been using. We start left to right or right to left, painting the color across our page. We continue to overlap each stroke. But then when we get towards the middle, instead of going back and grabbing the first color, the blue, we're going to actually start to grab a different color. In this case, I'm going to start grabbing some green. The colors are going to start to blend like a nice gradient. So the wet and wet, you're going to take your flat brush and you're going to get just clean water. You're actually going to just paint your paper with the water. And I'm going to get some concentrated color for my palette, and I basically just touch it to my paper, and because my paper is already wet, that color is going to start to bleed. What's really neat is you get all these interesting little feathers. If you don't like something, you can kind of come in with your paper towel and blot up color. Next up is dry brush. For the dry brush, this is more of a textural technique. We want our brush to be fairly dry and the bristles to be kind of separated like that. I'm going to take some fairly concentrated paint just at the tips of it, and I want to, as I'm brushing, allow that texture to actually show up on my paper, which is really good if you're trying to create grass. Our next technique in this row is the wet on dry, and really this is just taking paint on your brush and applying it to dry paper. This is where your edges, if you're applying paint directly to dry paper, are going to be very crisp. This is really good for very intricate details, lines, dots, designs. This is an example of where you can definitely use stippling as a brush technique. Our next technique we're going to learn is masking, and this is where you take some masking tape or painter's tape, whichever one you have on hand, and you can cut shapes out of it, but you just tape them down. So now I'm going to take my flat brush and I'm just going to do a really simple flat wash over the top of my masking tape. So now that our paint layer on the masking tape is dry, we're going to go ahead and peel back the masking tape. I have all the masking tape removed, I'm going to do a layering wash. Watercolor is very transparent and you can layer multiple colors over each other, and what will happen is that where they overlap, they're going to mix and make new colors. In our next section, I'm going to show you several other types of masking techniques. I don't actually have a white crayon, but you can also use a white colored pencil, and you can draw on top of your paper. You can also use a couple of different types of masking products. We've got the more professional white frisket, or you have just your basic rubber cement. Dip a little toothpick in this, and you can basically draw right over the surface anywhere you want. I'm going to try the rubber cement now. My frisket and my masking fluid and my rubber cement are dry. I'm going to go ahead and create just a wash over the top of it. Okay, now that my paint is dry, I'm going to go ahead and remove the rubber cement and the frisket. I can use just my hand and kind of peel it up. I can also use a little tiny ball of dried up rubber cement to. So you can see how anywhere that the rubber cement has been removed, it's a nice white area. Really great if I wanted to go back over it with another layer, or if I have areas where I want to leave them white. Okay, so the next technique I'm going to use is kind of a fun technique. It's got a little bit of a texture to it. Basically, you use rubbing alcohol in wet watercolor. So first we need to create a nice wash on our paper. Before it dries, I will dip the end of my brush into some alcohol and allow it to drip onto my paper. Okay, so our next technique is going to be salt. What we need to do is start with a lot of concentrated color and basically just get some of that color on our paper. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to sprinkle salt over the surface. You don't want too much salt, so just a couple of very light shakes. That was kind of a little bit more than I meant, but you're going to need to let this dry. Okay, so I've given the salt layer quite a long time to dry, and you can see that there's already some texture forming here. It's really important that you take off the salt. You know, nice and little like white blotches, almost like snow. For our next technique, we're going to do another texture. We just need a little piece of saran wrap or plastic wrap, and you're going to start by painting again your space with color. So I'm basically going to just crumple it up and lay it down on top and wait for it to dry. Okay, now that my saran wrap layer is dry, I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove the saran wrap to reveal the pattern underneath. And in this case, I'm actually going to use a straw to blow a small bead of watercolor paint and create kind of an abstract tree-like design. So I'm going to create a little puddle of paint right here. So now that my flat wash is dry, I'm also going to apply a technique called lift off. And I'm actually going to take a slightly damp brush. I think these work better because they're a little bit stiffer. I'm going to just put a little bit of water on it, and I'm going to come in here, and anywhere I want to lift off some of the paint, I'm just going to kind of scrub back and forth. I'm going to use a nice dry paper towel and blot away. I'm going to apply a technique with the stamp. Basically, this is just like what it sounds. I'm just going to grab an object. In this case, I'm using the cap of a Sharpie, and I'm dipping it in some nice concentrated watercolor paint. And I'm just going to use this to kind of stamp. For my last technique, I'm going to be using a sponge, and this is just a regular kind of yellow cleaning sponge. I'm going to dip it in my paint. While my sponge layer is still wet, I'm going to take the end of a paper clip, and I'm actually going to scratch through it. This will kind of mess up your paper, so just be aware of that.